All right, Jeffrey, you can take it away.
All right, well, thank you very much, Hope, and thank you all for showing up here tonight to hear about my take, or at least a portion of what I have to share about this very transitional and potentially very volatile year. These next 2 years, in fact. And one of the things that I would like to add, because I realized as Hope was giving the intro that there was no mention of my intro to astrology, um, the near-death experience and the shamanic trainings and all that are very vital, as well as the working with the psychic development and so on. But it is also helpful to know, I think, in terms of one of my approaches with astrology is that I studied the science of astronomy since I was just a kid. And so for many decades, and of course, the science of astronomy rejects astrology as not a real science, and et cetera, et cetera. The art of astrology is, of course, older, and the two were the same. But the bottom line here is I have that grounding in the original, or rather the science and study of astronomy from the physics, astrophysics, planetary science, et cetera, point of view, and that really informs what I add to the astrology because I have a clear understanding of what's going on from the mechanics of it, and then can apply it more to how does this work in our depth psychology. And the way I arrived at this is that as I approached my own Saturn return, which is, between 28 and 30, is a challenging time for everybody. Then a lady I was interested in said, "Oh, you're getting ready for your Saturn return. You should get this book and read all about it." And I was skeptical, but I did it, and it blew me away. And so I started studying it, practicing it very quickly. Was giving presentations, and I took to it very naturally. And so that was quite a while ago now, and but that's part of what I do with the astrology is, I incorporate my understanding. It's not always like really direct, but it's there in the background, as well as my love of the night sky. Astrology there's been a kind of a revival of the connection to the night sky, the whole sky, but there's been a revival of that, in the last many years, and I was already connected to it, and it's our eyes from the page, which is this two-dimensional um, representation of how the planets are forming, into what is the connection to the night sky. And there's going to be a few slides in this presentation which are my photographs of this night sky, some of these features. But let's start with the whole idea of where I'm going to put a little bit more of my focus in one of the phrases that Hope was using, that is part of the study here in the Theosophical Society, and I can't repeat it to you because I don't really know it that well, but this idea of the spiritual context. So a lot of what I tend to focus on is our spiritual evolution. There's what's happening out in life, and we as spiritual beings having our human experience, in that we are going through all of these uh, patterns and these movements and so on, and hopefully we're evolving in our manifest world, and at the same time that this is informing and bringing a more evolution to us collectively spiritually, but individually spiritually as well. So that's going to be a little bit of what I'm focusing on. It's going to be a blend of all those things. So what I'm going to start with is a little bit of an overview. When I said that this is a big transitional year, and if anybody has been paying attention, there's a lot of information out there about all of these big shifts that are going on in 2025, and actually starting in 2024, have to do with the outer planets, these big archetypal energies that are slow moving. They're all shifting their sign expression, or rather their seasonal expression. They're going to shift in terms of the mode, and that is significant to have so many of those happening all at once. And in many ways, excuse me. One of the references that we can do is to go back in time and see when those planets shifted in the past and what happened. But that is not entirely predictive. That's archetypally predictive. We see that there is some movement and motion, but we don't really know exactly what's going to happen. So it behooves us to be very observant, but secondly, to be really clear that because these are slow-moving planets, they are not going to be like night and day. For example, when Pluto shifted into Aquarius in late November, everybody's like, oh, that's the Aquarian age. It's happening now. It's the beginning. Well, the Aquarian age is really a long span of time, and there's many punctuation points. You know, we could say that it really might have started in the 1920s, but for sure the 1960s and up until the later part of this century, we might consider to be the beginning of the Aquarian age. And so the point that Pluto moving into Aquarius, not only is that not very sudden, we have to ease into it. I mean, I shouldn't say it that way. It's like it's going to take its time to really unfold. Secondly, I want to make 2 points that really clear is that the the planets, when we're talking about them in the context of astrology, even though we're observing what's going on in the sky and what are their relationships, we're really talking about the archetypal energies, the human archetypes that are co-resonant with the frequencies, the movements, the vibration of the planets in the sky. We are intimately tied to how the planets move. And the second point is just because they have moved into a new position doesn't mean that we are automatically evolved to all that that represents. It only means that their modalities and the relationships have shifted. So let me unpack that just a little bit more. If we have one human archetype that has gone through an evolutionary process, well, what we see in the planet might suggest what it is, but then we have to correlate it with, well, what are we seeing in the outer world? And that's pretty critical, because if we're just expecting, well, because the planets are all shifting, all of a sudden all this new consciousness is going to arrive. Yes and no. You know, it's still up to us and where we are. And even though I haven't even discussed in depth about these things, one of the statements I'm going to make is that it's apparent that we are still in a very liminal space, a very liminal point in time in terms of the evolution of our consciousness. And that is, I mean, we can see it around the world in all different kinds of ways. The challenges that we're in, we don't see any external signs that say that all of a sudden we're going to reach enlightenment, but we see a lot of external signs that we're in this huge transition. And there are decision points that we, as spiritual beings having this human experience, and as human beings, these points where we make our choices, where we're presented with, well, where is the state of this archetypal energy, and what will I choose to enact within me? Where am I at with it, and where am I going to act within me? So those are some of the things that I want to discuss. So just to recap that a little bit, there's going to be a lot of shifting in terms of the outer planets and in their mode of expression, and that's over the next 2 years. They those transitions, the level at which they will manifest in ways that we want, are highly dependent on what we choose to do and to bring forward. And the other part of the overview of the year, before I start looking into some very specifics, is that part of these transitions are not just about, oh, all the planets are going to shift. Pluto has already shifted into Aquarius. True, that's a big deal. The last time that happened was 1777, and the United States was in its Revolutionary War, and in its time period was creating its constitution and so on. There were a whole bunch of other things, technological advances, etc. So those are some of the things that we can expect from that. And we're going to see Neptune shift into Aries. That's very important as well. The last time it did that was in 1861. And Uranus will shift into Gemini. Now, this is the astrologies. I hope that this is okay. I try to do as much as I can without referencing the astrological technical terms, but these are the differences in signs expressions. And the last time Uranus was in Gemini was in I believe it was 1942, 41, 42. And prior to that was also the Civil War. So this is not, I'm referencing wars, but I would like to also reference the fact that with each one of these planets, there's huge changes going on, and sometimes those manifest as wars. So it's not saying that, oh, just because this is in this sign now that wars are going to happen. It has more to do with huge changes within the collective psyche of humanity, and that include technological changes, that includes the revolutions almost in collective soul. I'm going to focus a little bit on Neptune later, but Neptune is a very interesting planet. The other big shift is going to be that Saturn is also going to be shifting into Aries. And the last time that happened was in, I believe, 97. It was in Aries from 96 to 98, 99, something like that. But part of the significance is that Saturn and Neptune are going to be hanging out together very tightly. And I'm going to go into more detail about some of the manifestations, that possibilities with that. Over the next 2 years, it perfects in other words, it becomes exact in early 2026, but we're going to be feeling it. So the other another key point is to remember that all this happens in the context of cycles. In astrology, we tend to focus on, well, here's this point, there's this point. Like I said earlier, people would think, oh, well, okay, now Pluto is in Aquarius. Um, well, I don't know that anybody felt a whole lot different the day before or the day after, except people were excited about it. But those points, while they matter, and it's important that we focus on it, it's a little bit like how quantum mechanics works. When we focus on the light, it's a particle, and then when we're not, it's a wave. And so in astrology, there's these waves that are going on all the time, and we have to fit it into that context. Um, so let me go back to these outer planets that I've mentioned. I need to keep track of time because I want to get down to these slides that I want to share. Um, so I mentioned that we're I'm going to add there's movement in a number of planets, but the ones I've mentioned already are Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And with those three outer planets, the longest cycle planets, there's dramatic change that happens on these collective levels. And those are very long cycles. And what's happening now is that those three are not only changing signs, but they're moving into positions where they are the the aspect they make, in other words, the dynamic between them, are going into areas that we tend to see them as ease or flow, and they reference back to the points when they came together. So, what does that mean? Well, let's look at the uh, first of all, actually, I'm going to throw this one in, even though this one goes back a long ways. But Blavatsky, is being, the one of the co-founders of Theosophical Society, is, all of those thinkers and those change agents came in at the turn of the into the 20th century around that time, and that's when Pluto and Neptune were together, and Pluto being this energy of death, rebirth, but also of revealing what is hidden and what is um, needs to be brought forward and regenerated. That's that energy of that cycling, going through death, rebirth. And Neptune is the realm of all possibilities. It's the archetype of Neptune is um, where we can relate to it is the thought of a dream or a what we imagine, um, and uh, there are several other things that relate to Neptune, but it's coming from this place in our deepest unconscious level and even beyond the personal, this ocean of possibilities that can be brought forth. And it is definitely connected to the collective unconscious. And in some respects, I'm going to use this with just a little bit of hesitation, it is connected uh, to the collective soul in a sense. We as individuals are connected to that in the unified way, in a way that we speak of we're all one, and yet we're individuals within that, individual souls within that. So when we imagine things, it may be coming from our own unconscious and our own uh, levels, but they have the capacity of connecting beyond that. So there was this big transformational um, process that was going on. There are many other manifestations, but that was a very important beginning of a cycle, and that they have been in flowing aspect really for decades now. Uh, Neptune and Pluto. So what does that mean? It means that it's beginning to be opened up and seen, and that's going to go on for a very long time. So they're in a flowing aspect once again. The other very significant one is Pluto and Uranus, and that occurred during the 1960s. And that was this revolutionary time when um, uh, we were breaking free of uh, old ways of things being controlled, where a lot of things were being revealed, where there was more freedom brought, and the intention of bringing more social justice and equality. There were revolutions in uh, the way that we treat the earth and agriculture and medicine and individual expression. And so we have the civil rights movement, the women's movement, uh, the Native American movement. All of that came out of that time and disrupting status quo. And that is now beginning to move into a state where there is a real flowing aspect over these next 2 years. And here's where that idea of a choice point is coming in, because we know there was all that resistance. That's why one of the manifestations of that was the assassinations. There were many other ways in which there were resistance to those things that were initiated at that time. And we've gone through this flux of back and forth since then. And we should be moving into a time when these things are going to flow. So, which way are they going to flow? Back towards more control, Pluto controlling. I mean, Pluto can represent a whole bunch of things. It's not just regeneration, but it's also collective empowerment and where that flows to. And in our circumstances, the way we exist on the planet right now and have for really thousands of years is that people with wealth, people who have the money, who can collect the taxes, have a lot or have control over corporations, have monopolies. They collect a lot of money, have a lot of power. And in my view, that's a definite old paradigm. And one of the things that the 1960s, Uranus, the individual matters as an equal person, was going up against that idea of this kind of control where things are kept hidden and the powers that be. So there's a dynamic tension in there, and where we can as individuals make choices even though these forces are huge and beyond us, but we contribute to them. And that is a key point in terms of how are we going to evolve spiritually and how are we helping humanity evolve spiritually. I'm sure we've all heard that notion. When we do our work, we're helping others, or, think cosmically, act locally. Those things are very essential. And there's ways actually to amplify how we can impact that. And one of them is by doing ceremonial work, where we're aligning things. There's other ways too, but I'm going to mention that because at the end I'm going to share a ceremony that I'm going to be doing, where we're going to call Dreaming a New Earth, an Aquarian Astro ceremony and sound bath. And that is another way to try to amplify one's intentions. But you see that it isn't automatic. We have to continue to do the work. And right now, it might appear as though there is a surge of those with wealth and power or want to have control are having a surge here in our current reality. And that's an expression of this liminal space, as I said, where we're on the cusp of being able to evolve to a state where we'd like to think, or at least the ideals of the United States and the human rights declarations of the UN, et cetera, that people should be equal. Um, and yet we're a long ways away from that. So we have to keep doing that. That evolution's not automatic, but we are moving into a place where it can flow a lot more easily. So being as aligned as we possibly can and actively pursuing that. Uh, we have to really balance the notion of pulling back into who are we and the idea of just be and bringing that out, shining your own soul light out so that we're manifesting the vision that we want. And obviously, I'm probably expressing a little bit of my bias, but I bet there isn't anybody that would disagree that every soul matters equally in this world. And just because you have billions of dollars of wealth doesn't mean you should dictate to the rest of us how we should live. Um, so those are some of the things that are shifting on the broad scale. And it's kind of why, in talking to Hope, that maybe we should try to divide this up because it's a lot to take in, first of all, just that notion that, wow, okay, here we are, and there's a lot going on. And, the planets are suggesting a lot of these movements. And it's the idea of how can we align ourselves personally with these patterns in a way that supports us and supports the collective for the highest good. Um, so now what I want to do is, um, well, first of all, I hope I didn't confuse anybody. I can't see the whole gallery, so I hope let's just take a moment if there's any point of clarification I could make before I move into this first half of the year and what are some of the key things for us to align ourselves personally with. That's going to be the next segment that I want to cover. So, or maybe I'll do a quick recap first, is that the outer planets, which represent these big archetypal energies in the collective, are shifting. Many of these are beyond time. I didn't even mention that, but Saturn has to do with, um, I do need to spend some time on that, so let me redress that. Saturn is the the consensus reality. If Pluto is the energy of death rebirth, where our essence goes through the transformation, Neptune is this field of all possibilities, where it is like out of the fog, any kind of uh, crystals can come out, the hoarfrost that forms after a icy fog. And there's zillions of different things. But while it's in the fog, that's where the Neptune is. And Uranus is where the individual spark comes in to bring something from that field of manifestation, to give it the energy that it has to individuate and to come from these realms that are beyond time, all Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, beyond time, into the realm of time and manifestation. And so in each one of these areas, they have to go through a kind of process where they can arrive And then that beautiful little ice crystal that forms after the fog that we can see, that is the manifest reality. So Saturn, and Saturn has many elements to it. Often in astrology, Saturn tends to get a bad rap. That has been being rehabilitated lately because it's so important in terms of how are we bringing our soul's purpose into this reality. So there's three quick things I want to say about, well, I don't know if they're quick, but I'll try. There are three important aspects to Saturn energy and how we encounter it. And the reason I'm going to dwell on that is because it's significant in what we are seeing in the outer world. So Saturn is said to be the Lord or Lady of Karma. It is that part of our soul's responsibility to bring in uh, uh, um, the lessons and learning into this reality and to own our own as we grow and mature the authority of who we are as individuals, that we have written the the book of our life, and we encounter the existing physical field. So Saturn is about our lessons and about our karma, the way our soul is growing and manifesting a life. It encounters the physical field, which has been done collectively, and those things that are enduring and established, such as traditions and institutions, and literally the built environment. And those things are created, you know, collectively by decisions, and they tend to endure, and we encounter those, and we have to find our way through them, either with them or to make our place in that. And so when we're up against an institution that isn't supporting us because they don't like who we are, then we have to butt up against that to change that. So that's our physical reality, the manifest reality, and it is what in the social realm where authority is invested. Um, and then finally, well, actually, it's sort of a consequence of these first two notions, is that there's a third quality to consider with Saturn, which is that it has a mystic element to it. And there's many things that I could go into on this. I could spend a whole seminar just on that. But the way that the first two things interface is that we encounter, when we are living our life, we encounter our quote unquote, our Saturn, our lessons in the world that is extant out there, in that physical world. And it's partly because this mystical element comes, which arises directly out of the field of karma, out of the Akashic records. So sometimes if we think we want to go this direction, and we get frustrated and blocked by that, and it's like somebody's blocking us. Well, we have to discern whether we're supposed to push through that block because we need to make space for who we are, or whether that's not the direction we're supposed to go, because Saturn is trying to focus us over here. And an example would be someone who wanted to go to college but didn't get to because of disease or lack of money or whatever, but developed a shamanic ability and a spiritual perspective. Well, Saturn may have been blocking that person from getting the college degrees, which then opened up these mystical experiences which gave where the real soul path is. Okay, so we want to think about, you can kind of keep that in the back of your mind, that those are some of the elements of how Saturn works. So it isn't just authority and we got to push against it and, the thing we need to break down in order to create the new world. It is that too, but it's through some of these processes that assists us in doing so. All right, so those are some of the things that are going to be going on over these next 2 years, shifting into very different realities. And well, the adding the piece of like the elements that we're moving out of and into the elements we're moving into is somewhat helpful because it gives us another overall clue. So these were in earth and water. So we got mud, and now they're going to be shifting into, over the next 2 years, air and fire. So very fast moving, potentially consuming, and so on. And one is not better than the other. We need them all. But it's an awareness that as things move quickly, another key point I want to make is that things can move very fast. It emphasizes once more the importance of being able to stay grounded. And I don't mean just literally grounded with the earth, but grounded in yourself, to your own truth, your own soul's path and direction, and what you want to be contributing to the world. Very key, an important thing to remember as things move quickly, potentially over these next 2 years. All right, so now before I go to the slides, I have one more piece, which is that I mentioned the two really big outer planet cycles, but we're now also in two other cycles, and these have to do with Saturn. That's why I spent a little bit of time with that. So this year also kind of reflects back to 2020. Okay, now what are the things that happened? Well, on January 12th, 2020, Saturn was conjunct Pluto. That's something that happens roughly about every 38 to 40 years. It's pretty significant. But we all remember what went down in the beginning of 2020. I did a whole series of talks and ceremonies. There were a lot of other astrologers talking about it. But we know what came out of it. I mean, that was actually the day that it was announced that I can't remember if that was the first case in Seattle or when it was announced in Wuhan that there was this virus, et cetera, et cetera. I don't remember. But we were doing ceremony because what it represents is this deep transformational death rebirth of structures, of authorities, et cetera. And one of the ways that it does that is often the kinds of things that manifested, like the pandemic. And all kinds of things, that might be what we focused on, all kinds of things that we're not even paying a whole lot of attention to have gone through tremendous shifting and changing. But one of those is in policing. We all remember George Floyd, and that even though that had gone on a lot, that was the first time the whole frickin' world saw what was going on. And so that's one element of, and to take it to the deeper level, how are we going to change the way that institutions and authority and structure behaves towards all people, regardless of color and socioeconomic class, et cetera, et cetera. That's at least the hope and the promise of that. That was a seed point. At the end of 2020, we had what was known as the Great Conjunction, where Saturn and Jupiter were so close in the sky that you could see them. In a telescope, you could see the two. I got to do that. I got to pull out my old telescope that I built when I was 13, and it was cool, I have to say, because I built the darn thing when I was just a kid. But I got to see the two planets at the same time, and that is extremely rare. But the other point is that it was in that first degree of Aquarius. And so that the Saturn Pluto is a 38 to 40 year cycle, and the Saturn Jupiter is a 20-year cycle. And the Saturn Jupiter has a lot to do with business and government, institutions, and the philosophies that guide them. So there was some suggestion at that time, well, that's a very important thing in terms of signaling we're moving towards a more egalitarian and Aquarian point of view with some of these things, but it also was a signal that technology might expand, et cetera, et cetera. So there's lots of stuff. Each one of these things, I'm just trying to give you a tidbit to give you a flavor of it. But those two cycles are now at critical intention stages. With the Saturn Pluto, this past year, now remember, this is about the collective empowerment and how that's brought into institutions, or conversely, how people in authority try to concentrate their power. Okay, two ends of that same spectrum. or people with power taking authority. So it could go, we're going to go one direction where it's empowerment in the institutions for all, or the other direction where power is concentrated in a few individuals. So that's reached a stage where, if you imagine the crescent moon, so just a couple of days prior to the crescent moon, it's new. That was 2020, the beginning of 2020. And now you're just beginning to be able to see the consequences. If you imagine it's similar to that crescent moon, and it's starting to break away from the seed point. And so it's a choice point. It's a tension. Are we going to go back to some other prior manifestation, or are we going to go forward? And I gave you two ends of that possible spectrum. And so it would appear that collectively, a lot of the human collective are looking back to that old pattern of, a single all around the world. We have dictators and autocrats that seem to be rising to power because there's a certain number of people, or there's a fear and this is my opinion, there's a fear in the collective soul for what it really means to go to a new level and to take on the responsibility and authority for everything that is the promise and the possibility if we continue to survive and as the Aquarian age unfolds over the next 2,000 years. But we are so used to there being a ruler. In fact, a little anecdote, I was listening to, this might seem unrelated, but I was listening to an undocumented immigrant who's been here for 20 years and has tried very hard to get her papers, but she's worked, paid her bills, and her raised her children and paid taxes, etc. But she was commenting in this interview on how some of the people in her own community chose he's our president now as of noon, and couldn't believe why they did that. But or at least the interviewer asked, well, so some of your neighbors and your friends kind of voted against you. And she goes, yeah, because that's what they're used to. They come from Venezuela. They come from Honduras. They come from Nicaragua. Those are dictators. And that's to me just a reflection. That's not just about those individuals. It's a reflection of kind of where our collective soul is. Where are we? Can we really choose a place where we honestly have more responsibility? And it's not an easy question to answer because our system really kind of doesn't allow it very readily. In order to survive, you got to go along with the system. If you buck the system, you could get crushed and out. So it's how we find our way through that. So I'm also just going to add to that, even though it looks like we're looking back, I definitely don't believe that's a permanent thing. In some ways, because Pluto has part of the action and power of Pluto is to reveal things that are hidden. It's going to do a lot of revealing of what it's like to continue down the road of that kind of a system, or to continue into the road of an oligarchy. Bernie Sanders has been warning us about oligarchy for 30 years, and President Biden said it in his farewell speech. And it's evident when those top five have trillions of dollars in wealth. It's rather shocking, more than such a huge number. And that is definitely not an Aquarian ideal. How we do that, how we deal with that, I don't know for sure. Just stating the obvious. I just don't think that once it's revealed that the collective is going to respond to that. But right now, it seems to have voted for disruption, or there's disruption around the world. All of those are signals that from the 50,000 foot level, humanity is striving to make a shift, but we are still kind of anchored in the old paradigm. And the Jupiter Saturn is, that was right at the end. So that came at the end of 2020. It was virtually 2021 that took place, and that having a lot to do with government and business. But since I'm focusing a little more on government here, at that point, again, here in the United States, I don't know if this podcast goes elsewhere, but in the United States, Biden was elected, and for the period of time that Saturn was in Aquarius for 2.5 years, there were a lot of things that were established that were more future-oriented, arguably more future-oriented and arguably more equalitarian. He did a lot to bring in so many different people, the first Native American at a cabinet level position, et cetera, et cetera. All that was done. And then since then, Saturn shifting into Pisces. So Saturn having to do with this, what is solid and extant. And then in Pisces, which is related to Neptune. So it's this sense of it being diffuse and a lot of confusion about what's really real. And so that's where Saturn is now, about what is real and what do we want to dream into reality. But at that time, Jupiter and Saturn were coming together for a new cycle of growth and how we establish institutions, and the reality we want to live in. And now that one is at a very critical square stage as well. And this is, those two things are coming together at this time. Um, and uh, likewise, in this case, the philosophy that seems to be uh, more extant is I would argue this older, go back to this old way of being. And that doesn't mean that those of us who believe otherwise are supposed to give up like they won. In fact, what it really means is that's a stage with, if you want to compare it to the cycle of the moon, it's when the moon is standing up there, a half moon as the sun is setting, and you see it right there, high in the sky. It's the time for action. So if your beliefs are that we should be creating a different world, a different system of government, a different system of business, then it's a time for action for whatever your sense, your philosophy, your sense of how there should be growth opportunities, how that should be brought into the world. So those are some of the really critical things, the broad collective overview. And what where I want to go next then is in the beginning of this year, these are going to be some different planetary energies that are involved. At the beginning of this year, these first 2-3 months, highly suggestive of us finding our greater alignment, like I said, to be grounded within ourselves and on the earth, and more convicted in the direction that we want to go. And what are these other planets suggesting to help us to get there? And these are going to be the inner planets. So with that, I'm actually going to ask Hope to give us the first slide, and this was the way that the year began. Okay, so this was January 3rd at exactly sunset, which was a real surprise to me. This is a little side note, but one of the things I love to do is to go out and photograph the sky. That's what all of these slides will be. But for me, it isn't just about capturing an image. It's about being able to spend a time with a real phenomenon. And for me, it's almost like I get uh, downloads. Sometimes the ideas and all that are very conscious, but it's more like I'm taking it in that moment. And I'm not saying that it's required that one does that, but it is a kind of thing that helps us to connect. If you can get out and see the night sky, it connects us to the tens of thousands of years that our ancestors have done that, where they've looked up and wondered. But in this case, we have the moon and we have Venus. And this was January 3rd. Now, several things were going on at that, right around those same dates. But this was the one that was highly visible. And so what this represents in the 584 day, or the 19.4 roughly month long cycle of Venus, is that the demarcation points are when the moon comes along and conjuncts Venus. And it's always going to be a crescent moon because Venus is always close to the sun. And it spends half of that time, or 40% of that time, it is morning. Venus is a morning star, and so it's the old moon conjuncting it. And that is the part of the cycle where Venus is going through a process of removing old ways of being with respect to the Venus function, which is what are we bringing into um, what of spirit do we want to bring into reality? Venus commonly connected to love, beauty, um, uh, social norms and interactions and relationships, but at a deeper level, it has to do it with what we are embodying, what do we value, and what do we love? What and how do we love? And so this the ancient cycle that is related to Inanna connects it to when the moon conjuncts Venus, it is shifting to the when it's the morning star, the clearing of a chakra, letting go of the old way of being. And when it's an evening star, which is what this was, it is when we're bringing that new energy into the space that had been cleared in the previous 8 or 9 months. So, what is this one? In the beginning of the year, this is tied to the sixth chakra, or our vision and our imagination and how we think. And it has the tone, even though this occurred where it occurs in the sign and where the cycle began are important. Where this Venus cycle began was in Leo, and so it relates to having radical self-love, and so loving of ourself in order to shine it out into the world. So that's what Venus was processing through this 19-month cycle, which will end and renew into a new cycle in March. So we're nearing the end of that cycle of learning radical self-love and how to shine it out into the world. And uh, this was actually in, well, um, it adds to the notion of vision based upon the sign expression at the time in Pisces, or that might have been the end of Aquarius. I might not have that one with me here. The important thing is that it's about envisioning people empowered in their own sovereignty. It's another key word. It's not just radical self-love, but empowered in their own sovereignty, to being able to live from their heart. And at virtually the same time, um, Mars was opposite Pluto. Now, I don't have a picture of that, but well, first of all, before we move away from this, I'm going to continue with that because the next conjunction, the next moon conjunct Venus, that will still be extremely bright. It's at its brightest right now. It's furthest from the sun through this month of January, and on February 1st is the next time the moon will conjunct Venus, and might as well mention it right now, but at the same time, it is going to be conjunct Neptune. So, what is it that we value, um, and the ways of connecting through personal love? And Neptune, the realm of all possibilities and universal love and compassion, and furthermore, the North Node, which for those who are not familiar with astrology has to do with the connectedness to other people, to other souls in terms of directions of soul growth. All four of those are going to be conjunct at the same time. And that's why it is so potent, and that's why we're doing our ceremony there. I'll mention more about it We're doing our ceremony on that day. I'll talk more about that later, but I already commented on it. That's dreaming the new earth and the ways that we're going to amplify that opportunity moment. And even if you can't do any of those things, it is going to be a time when we can bring our personal values and the idea of the connection to our own sovereignty uh, in into what we're going to draw in from the collective soul. That's a little bit more explanation of that. Uh, and then there's going to be one more, which has to do with the the uh, the chakra above the seventh, the star soul star chakra, or the Antakarana as a Sanskrit word. And then Venus begins a new cycle in Aries. Uh, and that'll be late April going into May. And that's why that's part of the reason that we're going to separate out this talk where I've given the broad overview, and then here are the personal things. So these are the opportunities these next few months from the Venus, or the what are you bringing in? What are you embodying? Um, and how are you loving yourself and others? Strengthening that and preparing yourself to be in the more adventurous, projecting out their energy that Venus and Aries. It's still the feminine energy of what are we embodying, but this is about the values that you hold. And that continues all throughout because that's Venus itself. The values that you hold and want to bring in, and how that's related to love. But it's going to be a very significant shift in energy from the Venus or feminine, divine feminine point of view going into May. Okay, so that was part of it. Now, as I said, the thing that I can't show you, although we might as well go to the next slide, Hope. But almost on that same day, so this was January 3rd, that moon with Venus. And this was a little later in the month. In fact, it was just last week. However, if you look closely at that image, so this was last Monday, in fact. So it was just 1 week ago. This is the moon occulting Mars just beforehand, and we had light thin clouds, which produced that beautiful imagery with the um, uh, with the yeah. So Mars is at the lower left of the moon, and there's some other images of this, but the first thing I want to talk about, I want to leave that image up for a minute. And mention that at the beginning of the year, we also had the second of three Mars oppositions. Mars opposite Pluto. And that is can potentially be um, everything from a destructive energy to a completely regenerative directional energy. And then in that same weekend, we also had Mars move retrograde back into Cancer. So Pluto is now in Aquarius, and on the second or the third, it was Mars was opposite Pluto in Aquarius, and Mars was in Leo. So once again, this is Mars, which is that energy with which we thrust ourselves out into the world. It is our vitality. It is our zest for life. It is our desire energy. It is what motivates us. It is the energy with which we take action. And the energy with which it's literally an energy that brings the possibility or what we value or what we want to create into being, because we have to use that action, we have to use that vital life force to bring something into this, to create it in this world. So Venus and Mars work together that way. The values and what you love guides the way you act and um, and bring vital life force to bring into being. And there's a kind of, we associate love with with Venus, but one could argue that Mars also has this capacity for love. And I think I want to make a quick comment too about we tend to, um, especially in astrology now, and with the idea of the rise of the divine feminine, I think we've almost genderfied, if that's a word, but we've associated it too strongly with the genders, and we forget that we all have both of these things inside of us. We associated Venus with women and the feminine, and then it becomes a part of, you know, women and belonging to women. But trust me, all of us men have Venus in us. And likewise, just, you know, when a woman is acting out of somebody violating her boundaries in whatever way she can, she's using her Mars. And when Mars in Cancer is the quintessential mother bear protecting her family. Um, so just a quick note that don't identify these so much with the genders. There is some relationship, but it's almost superficial. It's important, especially for our spiritual evolution, that we understand that this is in all of us. And as we progress as human beings and as spiritual beings having the human experience, it's important that we know these things, in particular, moving into the Aquarian age, that that we understand. So, one comment about the Mars opposite Pluto, there tends to be with some of these transits. The first one was in late September, and it was um, Mars in Cancer opposite Pluto in Capricorn. And then this one was from Leo Aquarius. And the third one doesn't occur again until May. So this one in this retrograde position, what we can garner from this is several things. And this is where it can be important to consider because we're both seeing it out in the world and also what does it reflect within us. So Pluto can bring about the ways that Mars is used for good or ill, because you know Mars is associated with war because it's about projecting one's energy out there, and if something is conflicting with how a group of people or an individual is identifying or wanting to push themselves into the world, when there's conflict with that, then war results. Um, and but the initial energy is about forming Mars within each of us as individuals, helps us to form our identity and how we, venture out into the world and do the other things I mentioned to create and love uh, um, and protect. That is a part of our the human archetype is to protect, to create, to provide for, when we're actively uh, pursuing that life force energy. Those are all part of the Mars archetype, along with the notion of when we're in conflict with others or our identity has been um, uh, challenged by someone else, then we're going to get defensive or even attack. So one of the consequences is this is important for us to focus on, and with Pluto opposite it, is where in the shadow are my motivations. What is it revealing to me that or are my motivations, or how am I using that energy on an individual basis? But it can also represent using a lot of collective power for one individual's desires. And it's interesting because if we Leo energy, Mars and Leo can be very much self-centered, or it can be the generous king. It can be the one who is using all of that warrior energy to um, you know to give and provide for others. I'm going to use the term that I and with respect to the Anishinaabe, I hope I do this justice, but their word for warrior is Ogichida. Um, Gitchi is that same word in Gitchigumi, which is the Great Lake. It's big, and O is one representing a person, or one. Ogichi Da is the heart. Ogichi Da, one who has such a big heart that they will serve the people, that they will protect and provide and serve the people. That is their name for warrior. To me, it's a better word than warrior, because we associate warrior with war. But that's what the warrior in the best traditions does. And I find it a little bit ironic. I guess I'm not going to try to strip away where my own beliefs and opinions are here. I'm trying to give that somewhat generically, but I couldn't help but to contrast uh, who was certified as president at around that time versus the one who left the planet, the former president who left the planet at the time, one who could not have been a more exemplary human being in the way he used his hands and his energy and his vitality and his leadership in serving others. Um, you know, Jimmy Carter was not considered a great leader at the time, but in the end, he was totally, a great leader of our time in demonstrating how to be of service. So sorry for the political, I don't mean to offend anybody, but to me, the difference between the character of one man and the other, and actually, I mean, my hopes and prayers are that this new administration can do some good. I'm not, to just be against in order to be against is cutting off your nose to spite the face, to use the old thing. And yet, I can't help but see that what is being revealed to us with this Pluto energy is somebody who wants a lot of power and control, seemingly for their own purposes, which is also represented there, versus one who acted generously to provide for others. And that is for us to examine within ourselves and within our society. So we've started the year with that. What are we envisioning and what do we value? Venus, Moon. And then Mars opposite Pluto. What is going to be revealed, and how are we going to use collective power in ways that are supporting sovereignty? I'm going to throw that one in there too. Sovereignty and equality. Pluto in Aquarius and Mars in Leo. Individual sovereignty within the collective uh, equality, social justice. Those are possibilities. And that's part of the energy. So now, this image that is in front of you, as I said, this was when the moon occulted Mars. And this is Mars at this stage. That this was exactly a week ago, and 2 days later, it was opposite the sun, meaning that Mars is at its brightest and it is the closest to the Earth. So, once again, we're invited to examine deep within ourselves, where are we projecting our life force? What are our desires? And what are our motivations? And in this case, it's in the sign of Cancer. So I mentioned the idea, well, of Cancer. This is about Mars in Cancer has a lot to do with protecting and providing for the family, and that can be seen depending on um, your propensities, or whether you're looking close by or beyond. That family could be your immediate family, or it could be your community, your family of choice, your spiritual family. It can be um, your state or your nation, or it can be all of humanity, the human family. And I think in some respects we are asked to look at that. And the fact that the moon passed directly in front of it, the moon is that transducer. It's part of one of the elements of it becoming physical, about coming into our being, and it it represents a lot of things, including um, when we're looking at mundane charts, it represents the public. I jokingly said something about the inauguration day today, and that the moon is where we would look at what the mood of the public is if we were looking at a mundane chart like that. But in terms of us personally, it's what are we taking in? What are we absorbing into our own subconscious, and how do we feel about that? And and we can review I mean, I had a really profound experience actually a couple of days before, and then out and photographing this and meditating with it and so on. Uh, that revealed a lot of things where I have felt violated before, and where I felt I've not accomplished what I want in my life. And so there was some anger about that and other things, but that was to motivate me for where I need to focus in the future. So if you think back, because it's still going on right now, Mars is very prominent. So let's just go to this was a shot of the beginning of the occultation, and I'm just going to share these things that with you. We can go to the next picture, the next slide. Um, that's the close-up, showing that the moon is literally moving kind of diagonally from right to left, Mars being further out there. Uh, and um, so that's the same shot zoomed in. Next slide, please. And that's just revealing a little more of the features on the moon, but with the my I was taking it near a red pine because I wanted the forefront to be the red pine. So the pine needles are in focus, uh, and there's a little bit of creativity and symbology there. That there's the moon, and Mars is behind it, and the red pine to me is symbolizing um, its own, you know, steadfastness, resilience, uh, the fact that it's actually a tree that is resistant to fire, contains the word red. And so there's the moon, and that being absorbed into uh, our subconscious where Mars, Moon aligned. Next slide, please. Whoops. So we missed one. That's okay. Um, no, it's okay. It's just back up, back up. There's that one, and then there was supposed to be a picture of the moon after it had emerged. Mars had emerged, and that was a pretty cool shot too, but it's not important. So let's just stay here, Hope. In this image, um, this was just a couple of nights ago, and you'd have to kind of look closely because this was still, um, uh, I think this was Saturday night when that cold was just beginning to descend, and obviously this is still twilight. But it shows here where Mars is the lower of the three bright ones on the left. Those two stars are Gemini. That's Castor and Pollux. And it is nearer Pollux, which is the immortal. But as Mars retrogrades back, it will also align with Castor, which is the mortal of the twins. Now, you heard me mention earlier that is in the sign or the season of Cancer, and yet when we look up in the sky, it is with the stars of Gemini. And that relates directly to the notion of the changing of the age, where the equinox is precessing, it is moving backwards in the field of stars. And that is literally what we mean by the Aquarian age, is when the equinox, the spring equinox, the beginning of the astrological seasons, when that point reaches into the stars of Aquarius, is the beginning of the Aquarian age. So that means it all shifts. And it means that even though the Mars is in the 20s degrees of of Cancer, it is also in this moment aligned with the stars of Gemini. And that gives us um, another element, in as much as the myth of Gemini. I should be checking my time because oh shoot, okay, I'm up to 8:30 ready. The myth of Gemini is not just, you know, the twins. Um, I'm going to try to condense this, so give me just a minute. This represents um, our humanity merging together. One of the ways that is represented in terms of the divine and eternal self and the mortal self, and how these two, who are, you know, seen relatively equal, and that's across a lot of cultures, by the way. The Lakota also saw these stars as twins, but they were boy and girl. And then, furthermore, to go more into depth into the mythology, is that there were two sets of twins. And ironically, Pollux is actually six stars. It's three binary stars. It looks like one to us, but it has six elements. Interesting aspect to it. Or maybe that's Castor. I might be confusing that. Nevertheless, the in the Greek myth, there are twin sisters too, and it's Helen and I'm going to butcher the other name, but Clymestrea. Some we don't know or hear about those. We only know of Helen because she's Helen of Troy, and that's the divine, kind of the divine expression of the feminine. She's quite passive. Um, but the other one, the mortal uh, feminine twin, is um, the wife of Agamemnon, who has an affair while he's gone off to war, and then when he gets back, she murders him um, because he sacrificed their daughter to have clear sailing to go into war. And all of these myths have many things that we can glean from them, but one little aspect of that interpretation is that he was willing to sacrifice the daughter so that he could go into war, which is a horrific thing to do. But that's the notion of the potential of a future, his own daughter, and the feminine, the creative element to continuing the generations in order to freaking go to war. and and in this case, that twin, the mortal twin, feminine twin, is acting out of her passions because she's doing it with her lover, the lover that she had the affair with. And so she's acting more out of those um, physical and human passions. So it is suggested then that we really should be looking at this as a not as a two or twin, but a quaternary uh, elements. So it's both masculine and male, female, masculine, feminine, and mortal and immortal. And so here we have Mars near this constellation. And once again, we can kind of let your imagination go here with there's a dualistic nature to Mars, and what choices will we make? But there's also the suggestion here in the myth of integrating these at some level. Um, all of these elements and the Mars energy, that energy of life, the zest, and how we create our identities and project ourselves into the world, uh, and pursue and protect what we love and what we value. Now, Mars is also in a flowing, it's moving into a flowing aspect with Venus. And I'll comment on that next. But I wanted to show you this image because the other night, what it was really out there for, let's go to the next slide, please. Well, I shouldn't say what it was really out there for. The planets, several of the bright planets are visible in the night sky. All right, so this was, I don't know, six-ish, I guess, on Saturday night. And as I said, it was really butt cold that night. It was, as we know, the temperature was about, I don't know, 3 or 4 below, and the wind was kicking up. So it was 20, 25 below. So taking pictures was a crazy thing to do. But this image is Venus, obviously kind of overexposed, so it looks big. But Venus with Saturn, the other bright one that is very near it. This was the Venus-Saturn conjunction. And the background stars are Aquarius. Now, in terms of the sign expression or its seasonal expression, it's happening in Pisces. So remember I mentioned Saturn is in Pisces now, and it is going to be moving into Aries briefly in 2025 and then for a longer period in 2026. But right now it's still in Pisces. So what does this represent? Many things. I mentioned a lot of things about Saturn, but on a personal level, this can be about, well, what are the enduring Saturn values, Venus, that I want to hold in my own space, in my and into society. I also think it's fair to, in this case, even though I says we should, when I said we shouldn't attach too strongly these energies to genders, but I think it's absolutely fair to suggest also that where is the room for women in this society? Saturn representing that. It is going through this phase where there is a kind of uh, um, fuzziness, a confusion about what's truth and what's not, Saturn in Pisces. But it also, Saturn in Pisces represents What vision do you want to bring forth into this reality and want to bring into institutions? And so Venus is there. It was a beautiful, lovely sight. It's with the background stars of Aquarius, all of this pouring forth of new knowledge and possibilities and individuality. But it's really key about what are the enduring values? What do you love? Um, what will you do to help establish that reality of your truth, that which you hold dear to your heart, and the protection of the feminine, the flourishing of life. um, and because this happened, just a couple of days ago, it is part of the essence of right now as our government has shifted. Um, but if one meditates on it and pulls that in and holds that as an enduring quality within ourselves, it brings dignity and it brings integrity. A lot of times, if you go to look at the books and the interpretations of Saturn and Venus, it's not it, it's often expressed pretty negatively. Unlucky at love and this and that and the other, because there's this notion that Saturn constricts, but it also Saturn focuses, and it also is what is manifest. And I've already described in detail some of the elements of Saturn that is that mystic realm connected to the Akashic records that helps us to direct the life in a way that produces the maximum growth for us and the change in the outer reality that the consequences of us having lived, loved, and labored here will bring about. Next slide, please. Now, this one, oh yeah, and this one is quite blurred. It was hard to hold the camera steady to get these images because, like I said, it was, freezing my butt off. It was kind of crazy to do that, but I did it anyway. And now I don't know if you can actually see the images. Hope, what happened to the vertical one? Do we have that? What happened to it? Okay. So it's a little hard to see this one because it's shrunk. But in this image, you can see there's Orion is rising, and directly above Orion, the brightest object is Jupiter. And even though Jupiter is in the sign or seasonal expression of Gemini, it is there near the eye of the bull but between the horns of the bull. And you can see quite evidently also that the Pleiades are just above and to the right of Jupiter. And I already mentioned that Jupiter and Saturn are squaring each other this year. And that's quite significant in terms of where are you bringing your philosophy into presence, and that Venus Saturn, how are you bringing what you love and value into this reality? Those are a few critical things. Not to mention that the night sky is just absolutely beautiful right now. It's too bad that it's so cold, but whatever. So go back to that other image now, please, Hope, that I said skip back here to this one because it shows us the position.
Okay, one second. I think I'm not sure. Let's see. I blew it up and now I think, oh, there we go. Now I got it back. Okay, good. All right.
There you
That
go.
one?
Now,
Okay.
yeah. Now, like I said, this one is there's some blurriness to it, but if you can see, I can't move. My cursor is not visible, is it? No, yours is. So,
Okay.
can you point out Orion? Can you
No,
see?
but can you give me a clue? Is it over
It
here?
is. It is
Nope.
in the upper right quadrant.
There, over here,
Yeah, those are the stars of Orion. You got
right
your
here,
cursor
right here.
almost on the sword.
Yeah.
That's the
Okay,
sword.
there. Okay.
Okay, so he's
All right.
lying down there.
You want
Now,
me to blow that up? That part?
no,
Up?
no,
No. Okay. All
no,
right.
no,
I
no.
won't.
I'm
All
just
right.
kind of giving some reference.
Yep.
Now, you can slide your cursor to the left to the
Okay.
bright stars.
This one? Those?
There, that's you got
Yep.
it on
Yep.
Mars. You had just had it on
Yep.
Mars. That's Mars. And above it are the twins, along
There
with
they. Oh, I
those.
see it. Yep.
Well, it's that one and that one, and it's got a companion there because
That
this
one.
image, you're seeing a lot more of the stars of the Gemini, the full constellation. So it's not the best representation, but that was the best picture I could get y'all. So
While you were freezing
while I
to
was
death.
freezing.
Yeah.
Now, my point here is that Mars and all the things that I said about our motivations and our desire to protect, provide, to be the true essence of the warrior energy and the choices we have about it and what is being revealed about it, and that Venus, Venus and Mars are going to be moving into um, a position where they're mutually supportive of each other. So now I don't have any other additional slides. Well, actually, I do. And before I take any questions, because I know I threw a lot of information at you, but the overall point, and just leave that up there for now, Hope. The overall point is that these two archetypal pairs, Venus and Mars, are what are being really present to us here in January while these other outer cycles are unfolding in their time. And that's going to be really critical as things speed up. That's helping us to anchor. I don't want to like repeat it for the 10th time, but everything I said about that, what do you value and want to bring into the world? And what motivates you and what are you willing to put your energy behind to help the creation of that, of this better world? So I mentioned earlier that on February 1st, when Venus comes and conjoins the moon, like that very first slide I showed, or rather the other way around, because the moon is moving fastest. So, what are we going to embody in our vision when we have Venus is aligned with Neptune and the moon, with how the um, the connections to other souls, you know, of a similar vibration, or those souls that are going to help, where they're going to help each other. It's a kind of synergy. That's the way I'm going to describe it, because I could spend a lot of time on the nodal axis as well, which is also, just recently shifted. The nodal axis, I'll say this much, is connected to the eclipses. And we had that really powerful Aries eclipse last April, and then the um, lunar lunar eclipse in September, and then the full moon in October was a really important and critical one. But nevertheless, the lunar nodes has to do with a combination of the sun, moon, earth. So it's how spirit embodies and is linked to the collection of souls and our connections to others. So all of those things are coming together in um, Pisces just before all that is going to move into Aries, which begins these dramatic new cycles where we are forming identity in the Saturn realm, which is what are the institutions and structures, and how are we going to empower authorities or own our own authority? It's going to be in the Venus realm once again. How are you going to It's often said that Venus isn't comfortable in Aries, but Venus just operates differently. It's about living what you value and love in a very active way and going out and protecting it and establishing your identity in those ways. And Neptune, engaging in the realm of all possibilities and the collective soul of what do you want to bring forward. One of the things I didn't mention about Neptune is it also is the because it's all possibilities, it's also things like delusion and illusion and things that aren't true um, from the standpoint of what is in our manifest reality, and also may possibly not be true in our spiritual reality because it's just all possibilities. And so Neptune can be trying to escape truth or trying to escape the inevitable realities. And so people can go into different states of consciousness, uh, escaping their life through drugs and alcohol, for example. Or they can go into different states of consciousness in order to pull a broader and bigger vision in and more of a sense of our connectedness to that spiritual reality. So it's a very mysterious and complex energy. So why is that particular date important? Well, Venus goes retrograde that day as it starts to make its descent. It's the Venus, the last. There is one more Venus Moon conjunction, as I mentioned, but it's the last of the embodied chakras, the seventh chakra. So, how is what we value and love connected to our soul, to our source? Very big deal. The moon, how is it being embodied? Neptune, what do we envision or want to dream for our future? And the North Node, who are those souls that will help each other to do this? So we're going to have this ceremony on that day at the time these things are going on. And there's going to be many elements to this. The only thing indicated on this flyer is that there will be a sound bath that Frank DeCristina, who is a master of sound person and is trained in Nepal and many places and has a wonderful array of gongs and singing bowls. And I'll be conducting the ceremony. I will be opening it and bringing us into the space where the planets will be aligned. There will be planet symbols that are aligned to their positions in the sky, so it becomes very real to us. And there will be an altar space that will include what you see in the lower right is the representation of the flower of life and the Merkaba, which when we have 6 people, we can walk and weave that Merkaba. It's a way to help bring those seed ideas, even if we don't know exactly what they are, but we're going to engage in it, the idea of helping bring it into reality. And I'll have another representation of that. I'll lead us through a guided meditation to help us to get into that space as it aligns in the sky. And then we'll journey with the sound bath and this weaving together with that Merkaba labyrinth. So I invite everybody to come. It will also, there's a live stream option as well, and that's you register on my website. It will be recorded. You sign up and pay for the live stream. I just saw that down there. It will be recorded. So sign up for the live stream and then you'll get access to the recording.